Hey everybody, me and Buster Green here. Alright, so today I want to talk about Elio, the doomed little movie that tried to be about something. I'm going to start by doing a summary of the film, and then afterwards I'm going to dive headlong into the various controversies and upsetting stories that came after the film, which I think really changed the context around it. So let me start off by where I came from. Elio came out a few weeks ago, and it was arguably destroyed in terms of both hype and viewership by K-pop demon slayers, which didn't get a theatrical release at all, but nonetheless got all the praise and audiences that week. Elio, meanwhile, was a failure, and such a big failure that I actually had a really hard time seeing it, because after the film flopped the first week, it was immediately pilled from a majority of the theaters around me. I went to the mall to see it, and surprise, it was gone. They had already kicked it out for more showings of live-action Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, which were older than that. I ultimately found one theater doing a rare 3D showing at the theater still trying to do 3D movies at the thing. Alright, so first things first with Elio, the movie didn't quite add up for me when I watched it. I definitely walked out of this movie that didn't make sense. But now it's been a week later and I'm hearing more things about it, and I think I finally fully understand it better. So let me go through it now in this big post-mortem on Elio.
この番組はヨランのスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
Elio is bizarrely set in Southern California in the 1980s, or at least that's what I think is going on. It has a lot of out-of-place era markers that really scream 1980s, but this film also was really mangled in post-production. So the film has been rewritten, and it's not clear exactly where it's set anymore. It might still be the 80s because nonetheless, there's a lot of 80s shit there. There's Alf references, there's 80s music, so I could guess it's in the 80s, but I definitely wouldn't say it's set in 2025 either, as there's too many technological inconsistencies to the fact no one has a cell phone in this movie and everyone's still using ham radios, even though ham radios effectively stopped being cool in the mid-90s. Also, Carl Sagan is still actively on TV in this movie, even though he died in 1996. So you could argue this movie takes place in the early 90s at the latest. However, the one thing that's majorly out of place with that is Elio's Aunt Olga has this futuristic sci-fi Space Force job where she's in charge of monitoring extreme levels of space debris orbiting around the Earth on a level that seems much, much worse than it is in real life modern day. This level of space debris is something I can only compare to the anime Planetes or Cowboy Bebop. Overall, the setting doesn't make sense. It feels like it's the past, but also there's high-tech sci-fi things in the past. In the end, this movie is kind of butchered, so the setting doesn't make sense because of the butchering. It seems like Disney blatantly tried to modernize what was originally a period piece, but I'll get into that later. Anyway, so Elio lives with his overstressed Aunt Olga, who gave up her job as being an almost astronaut to raise him. It's pretty much the Lilo and Stitch situation, but not in Hawaii. And I find it bizarre that Elio and Olga are clearly Latinos, but Olga is a very Russian name, so I'm not sure who picked that one out of a jar. Anyway, his parents somehow died in a way that's never explained, and so after a trip to the museum, Elio rewrote his entire personality to be the all-the-time I love outer space kid. The movie actually does have this super relatable opening scene in the start where he runs away to a museum and becomes super obsessed with the Voyager spacecraft, which once again fits in with the retro setting because I remember in the early 80s, they were hyped that Voyager was still going and a big deal. And then it was in Star Trek, the motion picture. Anyway, so then Elio becomes obsessed with trying to find aliens, and he wants to get abducted by aliens because I guess he hates living on this army base, even though this base is coincidentally the only army base in the US searching for aliens. So that seems kind of like a contradiction. Why would you hate living in the one place that is in line with your life goal? That's not a problem, that's a blessing. Anyway, so he actually hates living there because there's other kids there that full on completely bully him for being a nerd who likes aliens. Now, anyway, there's this also crazy over-designed character called Melmac. Melmac is an Alf reference. Alf was from planet Melmac. It's the 80s references. Anyway, he's all about finding aliens too, but no one takes him seriously. And for whatever reason, he and Elio aren't friends, even though they're literally the same person. Anyway, through intense oversight, Elio is able to steal Melmac's program and use it to contact the aliens, so then the aliens become aware of him. However, his Aunt Olga catches him doing this and punishes him and sends him to a very 1970s, no technology, no air conditioning military camp in the middle of the woods, which coincidentally all the bullies from the military base where he lives also all attend every day, and they plan to seemingly kill him in a very dark scene that, once again, in the 80s, kids just got together and tried to kill each other. So yeah, this is definitely an 80s period piece. Now, luckily in the nick of time, Elio then gets abducted to the Communiverse, a space United Nations organization of cartoony-looking, fishy-looking aliens who are all very, very fruity and drink something called Glorp, that is a watermelon icy, exclusively available at AMC theaters near you. So then they replace Elio with this like hyper-obedient clone made of slime, and there's a few low-key horror scenes where Aunt Olga slowly realizes she's dealing with this like alien clone. Meanwhile, Elio is stoked to be in this like cool alien universe that he's been invited to. He gets new clothes and he lies that he's the leader of Earth. The Communityverse then challenges him that he needs to like defeat this evil space warlord to join as a member, so Elio tries and then fails, but is then somehow able to capture the warlord's son, Glorden, who is this giant silly bug thing that acts like a little kid with the personality of a talking dog. Anyway, Elio and Glorden become like best friends, and Glorden hates his dad anyway because Glorden's dad wants to force him to become a heavy metal space soldier and fight in like an endless space war. So Elio makes a weird plan to kidnap Glorden and replace him with a weird clone like he did for himself. The plan, however, fails as Glorden's dad immediately sees through the clone, immediately murders the clone, and things go from bad to worse as Glorden's dad conquers the Communityverse, and Elio is exposed as an incompetent lying child, and Glorden is randomly jettisoned to Earth in an escape pod, escalating the situation. So Elio is like warp portaled back to California, but only he knows the full scope of the situation and is the only person who can fix it, save Glorden, and therefore the Communityverse. So then in a pretty nuts third act, Elio reconciles with his Aunt Olga. They vow to team up and fix everything. Elio sacrifices his clone to confuse the government in definitely the most horrifying scene of the film. The clone like dies and melts all over a guy, and then they like steal Glorden's escape pod and they try to get him back to space before he dies of like hypothermia. Unfortunately, coming full circle, the Earth is surrounded by a thick layer of space debris in this movie, which is completely sci-fi and nonsense. And without a full understanding of like how bad space debris could get in the future, the movie totally doesn't work. And so Elio and his aunt are doomed to be ripped apart by space debris in outer space. But luckily, out of nowhere, Elio is somehow able to simply use the ship's alien computer to contact Melmac, the ham radio nerd, and his well-networked group of ham radio nerd friends, and they help Elio find all the space debris, fly through it, and fly back to the Communityverse, where they return Glorden to his dad. The dad forgives everyone, backs down about taking over the universe, and then Elio and Glorden declare that they love each other, and the Communityverse forgives Elio for lying, declares that he was a hero after all. They offer him an all-expense luxury home in space, but he randomly declines it because he just can't abandon Olga, making this movie ultimately a reverse Lilo and Stitch, which is great because we just had a live-action Lilo and Stitch that was just a plain evil and ugly version of Lilo and Stitch. And then the movie randomly ends on Carl Sagan reminding us that the truth is out there. Doo-doo-doo. So in a nutshell, that was Elio, a movie about an isolated kid with no friends who was in the one position that allowed him to carry out his dreams. He proceeded to carry them out, but then he ultimately abandoned all his dreams to live in poverty forever with his emotionally stunted aunt, who didn't fundamentally want to raise him either because she had her own selfish plans of being an astronaut. But she stepped up at a time of family crisis, and then they learned to love each other through like mushy family bonding, blah, 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 Disney, whatever. Yeah, so despite how complicated and bad that sounds, when the movie was over, I didn't outright hate it. I didn't love it, but I felt it was mostly good because I felt it was relatable in its 1980s aesthetic and its weird obsession with Carl Sagan, which entirely won me over only because as a kid in the 80s, that was kind of me. I was one of those weird kids watching those old Carl Sagan, Leonard Nimoy documentaries from the 70s because there was literally nothing else to watch on like non-cable TV in the early 80s, early 90s at the time. But then I immediately got angry at the movie because then it was unclear about whether it was set in the 70s or the 80s or in the 90s or today or the distant future. Because overall, the movie screams low-tech 80s. It's got this constant 80s soundtrack. It feels like it's trying to be like a kid's version of E.T. or Contact or one of those other Alien First Contact stories. But then the space debris situation. That is so not normal. That is like straight out of a post-future sci-fi alternate history story where like the moon blew up. Like, even though I know space debris is a problem, they like make it sound like the Earth is like covered in like a blanket of like constant garbage. And I'm pretty sure it's just not at that level, not right now. Maybe it will be like in 100 years, but like I don't think there's like multiple people who have to be stationed around the clock looking out for space debris. That really feels like they just took that out of Cowboy Bebop or something. All right, so that's my overall review of Elio, but now I want to first talk about the initial controversies that popped up when the movie first came out, and then we're going to go deeper and deeper until I hate this movie. So the number one initial controversy over this film, and I believe what really did this one in, was just people saying that it was visually boring. It looked like nothing new, which I will agree to, and some people are getting very extreme and saying it's straight up ugly. I do think that with all the animation companies lately just pushing 3D animated movies one after another, there is something of a super saturation point that we're hitting, and I think that is why now Disney is actually considering pivoting back to 2D movies. So anyway, there's so many complaints about the look of this film that I'm kind of all over the place with some of these. Some of these I hate. Some of these I think are completely justified. So I'm just going to pick a couple of these out of a hat and tell you right off the bat if I agree with them or if I disagree with them. All right, so sticking my arm in the hat, random complaint number one. This film has dumb costumes. Why is Elio covered in kitchen appliances? He looks like he's dressed like Danger Woman from Tailspin. That's a really specific reference. All right, I disagree, or I guess I can agree that the kids' costumes are dumb, but like, didn't you ever wear a dumb costume as a kid? Like, weren't you ever in like a play or something? I mean, that overall seems too harsh, like to give up on the entire movie over a small detail like that. Random internet complaint number two. The human characters suck and ruin the film for me. They should have just made this film entirely a film about aliens, so it would have been more in line with the previous Pixar movies like Zootopia, Toy Story, Bug's Life, Elemental, etc. That's a really hyper-specific nerdy complaint in my opinion. I guess I can see this being technically more thematically in line with previous Pixar films if it was all aliens. But I don't know, if it was just the same story set on like Planet Melmac and not Planet Earth, I don't think it realistically would have improved the movie. Also, we had people pushing it the other way, that saying the aliens were just too much like blobfishes for the most part, and too much of the alien environments just looked like they were nothing, just some colors and patterns. And now with people doing AI art all the time, people are getting more desensitized to a low effort output like that. Anyway, enough with the hat. Summing up the rest of these in a nutshell, the big gist of it is a majority of people are mad that the film suffered from the oversimplified, over-refined Cal art style where everyone has a bean mouth, which is an art style very commonly occurring amongst freelance artists in Los Angeles and has been very overplayed in the media lately. I can see some people here comparing this movie unfavorably to both Steven Universe, which famously had its art style changed into Cal art style, that one ultra cringy Grubhub commercial that everyone hated, and the movie Turning Red, which, yeah, this movie actually is visually connected to Turning Red, and that movie did infamously use the bean mouth style. So yeah, on all of this, I can say, while the film definitely lacked any unique visuals, like if you told me this was a scene from Turning Red or like a 3D render of Steven Universe, I definitely would be a little bit confused by that. But then there's also another group of people complaining online that the characters in this film just were ugly and not human enough. Like there's a big running complaint that too many of the characters in this movie had dog noses and not human noses, which is a very hyper-specific complaint. But yeah, compared to this and Turning Red, in general, like people were also complaining that Turning Red had an undetailed style, where if they were real people, they would have all had like ridiculous noses and giant fat cheeks. So, I don't know. What do you think? Leave me one in the comments. I guess the point of all this is the argument here is that people want Pixar movies to look more realistic and more like real people. I guess I can kind of see that argument because there is sort of an argument here that recent Pixar films have settled into this like homogenous range. And there's a certain logic to that if these films are all using the same art style, then yeah, sure, you can save money by just like trading up props and common assets between them, which is actually something Pixar used to do a lot in its older movies. But in the newer movies, it seems like if they're still doing it, it's hard to notice it because everything's just so homogenous that even if it's happening more, you wouldn't be able to tell. So I guess I can agree that Elio definitely lacked its own style, and it definitely used the same style as Turning Red, but that was actually on purpose because of some behind-the-scenes drama where the original director quit, and then the movie was taken over by Turning Red's director Domi Shi, who therefore literally applied the same art style to this movie as her last movie wholeheartedly. Otherwise, it does look like there is some like early concept material where the film was originally planned to have its own style, but I guess that stopped being the case at some point in production. Now, that being said, something dropped a few days ago that completely changed the entire narrative about this film. In the recent days since this film bombed and became a box office failure, a behind-the-scenes tell-all article that exposed what went down dropped in The Hollywood Reporter a few days ago. And it kind of paints the clearest and darkest and widest picture of why this film went wrong and became confusing, why it failed to be really a movie about anything. And reading through all this kind of really made me hate this movie or hate what the movie became, because it really explains how so many things changed in this movie that it became a shell of its former self, and that kind of shocked me. All right, so to put this all into context, we have to rewind back to Turning Red, maybe even before Turning Red was made. I actually love Turning Red. I think it's the best movie Disney and Pixar have done in probably this decade. Turning Red, though, is overall a disguised biopic. It's a disguised biopic as Domi Shi, as a child growing up in 1990s Canada, at odds with her immigrant mom, and then what if she had superpowers to turn into a monster panda or something like that. Now, Elio was supposed to be a spiritual sequel successor to that film, by being the exact same concept, a disguised biopic. In this case, it's the biography of the original Coco director, Adrian Molina. Now, to sum up this original biography, or rather to give you Molina's biography, Adrian Molina is a Mexican-American born in 1985. He grew up in Southern California. As a kid, he felt deeply isolated and alone. He grew up watching Carl Sagan reruns, same as me in the early 90s. However, Molina was gay and didn't know that and didn't know how to deal with that because he grew up in this like large Mexican family where he was constantly at odds with his immigrant mom, who constantly pushed him and denied him his interest in frivolous gay hobbies, especially gay fashion, which was completely forbidden to him. So all this changed finally in the early 2000s, where he finally moved out away from his mom and went to college at Cal Arts, became openly gay for the first time in his life ever, was finally able to dress as freaky as he wanted, and had his first open gay romance with a young man, and then immediately got a cushy job at Pixar, where he's been ever since. What a life. Kind of jealous. Anyway, so Turning Red was Domi Shi's magical biography, and this is Molina's magical biography. Elio is Molina. His name is almost an anagram for Molina, just with the letter M and M taken out, so it's like... Anyway, yeah. In short, the original script for Elio was something of an adapted version of Molina's biography with just two little or major changes. Instead of joining Cal Arts and Pixar while realizing he's a gay 20-year-old, Elio is a little boy who goes into space and joins a bunch of space aliens, is allowed to dress up like a prom queen, and realizes that he's gay as a 10-year-old. True to Molina's original life experience, the original climax/ending of the film was that Elio would fall in love with Florian, who in the original draft was not a disgusting worm with no eyes, but another handsome young boy. And also in these storyboards, Elio has a hookshot, I guess. Hookshot for the win? Did Disney not realize that that's something The Legend of Zelda explicitly made up? And that's not a real device that kids can just buy at a store? I guess fundamentally they did, because there's no hookshot in the final movie, but hey, hookshot. I love the hookshot. Anyway, so the movie, if this information I'm being told is accurate and not just a shitpost or some other bait to trick me, in its initial concept was an early 90s period piece about a gay Latino boy finding out he's gay after traveling to outer space, And that apparently wasn't a crowd pleaser. While Molina was very hardcore about this is my life, this is my story, take it or leave it, and some Pixar staff definitely loved this version more than the final version, apparently when test audiences watched it, a big question at the end of the Q&A was, would anyone pay to see this movie? And the answer was repeatedly a 100% no, no matter what changes were made to this version. So then, amidst the Trump administration rising to power, Disney deciding to cut out all their gay content through most of their programs, work was then started to completely rewrite, completely remake, completely de-gayify Elio, a story that was explicitly created for Molina to vent out, and so the movie was completely changed to not be that. Molina got so pissed off at this that the movie he created to tell this story about him and his life experience was being rewritten, and it was no longer his live journal. And yeah, can you blame him? It's like the film could have been literally called the biopic of Adrian Molina, and the studio notes were change everything because Adrian Molina is just too gay. So eventually Molina rage quit the project over this. He moves on to do Coco number 2, and when he quits the project, Domichi takes over. Another weird aspect is initially in the biopic version of the film, it was a biography about how he was Latino and how he was at odds with his Mexican-American family, at odds with his culture and nationality. And so all that was also completely removed because who wants to think hard about like the struggle of being Latino in America? American Ferrera was originally cast as Elio's mom in the biopic version, but the mom character got rewritten to Aunt Olga. Olga is not a Latino name, and so Ferrera also rage quit the project because in her mind, the project just stopped being the biography of a Mexican-American family at odds with their gay kid, and she also felt it was very insulting for a project about Latinos to now suddenly be led up by an Asian woman. So yeah, Domichi reworks the project as much as possible to try and save it, increases her CalArts beam-off style because that's what she's comfortable with. Although now I have second thoughts about if the CalArts style was really so bad for this film. If the film was literally inspired by Molina's time at CalArts, the CalArts style is kind of fitting. It seems like now it's a purposely stylistic choice embedded in the film, and now I kind of like it more. But anyway, finally under guidance from Bob Iger to make Elio just less gay and less offensive to people who hate gay people, they were in the end left with a movie about nothing. That's not even clear about what time period it takes place in, because the biopic elements were scrubbed away and sci-fi elements were pushed in. So that's the final movie we got where nothing makes sense. It makes no sense because it was a very, very gay movie that had all its gay pride sucked dry at a time where gay people are being literally erased in both real life and fiction. Very fitting for the end of June, I would say. So yeah, honestly, the Hollywood article makes me kind of hate this movie. I guess in the end, I'm not mad about the movie being gay or being not gay. What I'm mad about is that they hired a director to essentially tell his life story, and then they thought his life was too controversial, so they removed every identifying factor that it was his life. That's what I get pissed off about. It's not just that Disney won't create new movies. It's that when this guy tried to make a new movie, Disney censored it so much that in the end, there was nothing unique about it. I overall think this movie could have been better if it had been about something, but since it was explicitly this one guy's biopic about literally his life, and they mangled that and turned it into a cheap ripoff of Lilo and Stitch mixed with E.T., I guess this is kind of not the best movie. I guess it's going to go down as another weird footnote in Pixar's history. There are some now fringe groups demanding to see the original gay Latino biopic version, but I don't think that cut will ever be released because I doubt Disney would ever let something like that out of their vault. I don't think their current leadership would ever be okay with that one. So ultimately, I'm not sure what to make of this story. I definitely think there was never going to be a willing audience for a gay Latino biopic aimed at kids, but I also can't entirely approve of the final product either for how bland and meaningless and ultimately flat it all felt. So I hope in the end, at least the art style discussion might hopefully get Pixar to shake some waves and try a little bit harder in the industry, because as it is, K-pop Demon Slayers is really putting them to shame and making them look by amateurs, as Sony Pictures really keeps raising the bar. All right, so that's what I had to say about Elio. I did sort of like it, but now knowing how much shit was like taken out of it, I feel like it just paints another picture of how like artists can't really survive in Disney because everything has to be like desensitized to appeal to the widest group of people. And when you're trying to appeal to everyone, you appeal to no one. And so that's another like thing that in my mind, I think ruined this movie. But tell me what you guys thought. Did you hate Elio? Did you love it? Do you agree that the art style needed some more work? Did you think it was too much like Turning Red? Did you want it to be more different? I don't know what to think of this one, so I'm just going to step away from it. All right. At least it was cool seeing Carl Sagan again. Rip Carl Sagan. We miss you. Good night, everybody.